So I'm truly honoured to be here today for the Ozanam Conversation and to continue the modern Australian custom of acknowledging the traditional custodians. I'm currently on the land of the Kulin Nations. And as we gather on this sacred land, let us acknowledge that we are standing on country for which the members and elders of the local Aboriginal community and their ancestors have been custodians for thousands and thousands of years, on which we've performed age-old ceremonies, celebrations, initiations and renewals. We acknowledge their living culture, their spiritual relationship with this land and the unique role in the life of this country. We honour the presence of these ancestors who reside in the imagination of this land and whose irrepressible spirituality flows through all creation. We acknowledge their living culture, heritage beliefs, and recognise it is still very sacred and important to them today, as it has been since time immemorial. We have lived in this land of the great South Land of the Holy Spirit since time immemorial. We have been here since there was a land bridge between Victoria and Tasmania, and our people walked that bridge. We've lived through 3 ice ages, and we survived megafauna. They hunted us and we hunted them with stone spears and axes. We survived and we coexisted for 17,000 years. The Creator chose Aboriginal people to take care of this land, and our law was to nurture everything that had been created. My ancestors have danced and sung the creation stories of all creation, proclaiming the sacredness of the gifts given to us by the Creator Spirit. Our relationship with the land is at the centre of our lives. Our country is our mother, in a sense. Our country is us. We are born the spirit of this country. It is where we're conceived, it's our home, and it's where we belong. We have a totemic relationship with the birds and the animals, which connects us to both the physical world and the spiritual world. And this is underpinned by a reciprocal obligation to care for each other and the natural environment. It is a birthright that has been handed down through our bloodlines from generation to generation. As caretakers of the land and all that has been created, our people have used fire as a way of rejuvenating the country, of bringing new life to the animals and the inheritance of rich, fertile soil for future generations. As a Queensland, Mulluridgee, Djabugay and Olkola woman, and on your behalf, I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land. We acknowledge the elders, past and present, and our youth as they hold our dreams for the future. And I ask that you remember that my ancestors have had a deep relationship with the Creator Spirit thousands and thousands of years before the birth of Abraham. And while there have been great changes to this land over the many generations, we know in our hearts that the story and the spirit of the traditional custodians will always be written in this landscape. So imagine my people camping along the waterways throughout Australia and performing the age-old ceremonies of dance and song-telling of the creation stories. This is holy land, and the great challenge to all newcomers to this land is to open your eyes and see the stories that have been written, to open your ears and hear the songs that have been sung, and to feel the sacredness on the land in which you stand today. We ask you to always remember and appreciate the traditional unity of land, spirit, and the First Peoples. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you.
Welcome to the Ozanam Conversation for 2021. I'm Kevin McMahon, the State President and your host for the conversation. Last year, the event didn't happen for obvious reasons. However, here we are in 2021, ready to roll on despite the ongoing issues with the COVID situation. Thank you everyone for your flexibility in holding the event this way, especially our speakers. Our topic is, how can we do better in our relations with our First Nations peoples? In our opening prayer at meetings, we use the words, open the hearts of your faithful, Tonight, I'm asking you to open both your hearts and your minds. I welcome our speakers and thank them for their generous willingness to lead us in this conversation. I look forward to the challenges they will present to us. As members of the Society and as Catholics and as non-Indigenous Australians, we come to this topic pretty much underprepared by our experiences. Our exposure to Aboriginal culture is limited, unless you throw in our love affair with sport and football in particular. We need to be better educated in the broadest sense. If you are of my vintage, you will realise that our education about our own history had some glaring gaps. Most of us know more about the history of the African Americans through mini-series and news coverages, especially during the 60s and 70s. How sad is that? I grew up in Thornbury, and as kids we were proud of our local celebrity, Pastor Sir Doug Nicholls. We didn't know much about him except that he'd been a famous footballer. However, it was not until I was lucky enough to study Australian history at tertiary level that I was exposed to the other side, the neglected story. Clive Turnbull's Black War was an eye-opener to me. It told the history of the systematic hunting down of the Aboriginal people in Tasmania until they had all been removed. Since then, I have been blessed to have had the opportunity to do an immersion trip to an Aboriginal community in the Northern Territory, organised by St Vincent de Paul nationally, and have been part of a cultural exchange to the Tiwi Islands. There's a famous saying attributed to both Edmund Burke, an Irishman, and Churchill, but first used by a Spaniard, George Santayana. To paraphrase, if we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat its mistakes. There is much for us to learn. Admittedly, the Society of St Vincent de Paul has taken some initiatives in the effort to build better relations with our First Nations peoples, but not enough. For example, we have a reconciliation action plan. We acknowledge country and do a prayer of reconciliation at our meetings. We give assistance when requested, and as with anyone else, it's based on what is needed. However, we are not doing nearly enough. Ask yourselves, why do we have underrepresentation on our staff? Is it to do with being welcoming or not? Why do we have instances of judgment based on background? Why are we not better addressing the wider issues of injustice? For example, the poor education and health outcomes for Aboriginal children, the inordinately high number of deaths in custody. Why do we not really understand Aboriginal cultures and spirituality? To quote our meeting prayer again, and please indulge my paraphrasing once more. May the First Peoples of Australia be welcomed. May the First Peoples of Australia be respected. May the elders be blessed and honoured. May this sacred land inspire us to come together as one. May we heal one another. May we build a future based on justice and love. May we learn from each other. In that spirit, our speakers are going to point us in several directions. I look forward to hearing from them about how we can learn and do better in our relations with our First Nations peoples.
Thank you everyone for joining us for this year's Ozanam Conversation for 2021. My name is Brad Stevenson and I'm the Mission and Spirituality Manager here at St Vincent de Paul and Vincent Care. This year's Ozanam Conversation is taking place, as you know, virtually in this season of pandemics and lockdowns. After a year of hiatus last year in 2020, this conversation follows on from the brilliant conversations that took place in 2018 and 2019 around the theme of the Catholic Church's response to the Royal Commission into child sex abuse. In choosing this year's theme and speakers to come and talk to us, the members of the Society have decided that the theme of reconciliation with our First Nations peoples is our next way forward. We've talked about in 2018 and 2019 about how we failed the children. And now what we need to talk about is how do we start making better futures for our children as a Catholic Church and also as a St Vincent de Paul Society. To that end, we have three great speakers. We have Sherry Balcombe, who has gratefully volunteered her time. She's a very proud Olkola Djabugay woman from Far North Queensland, which is the country that my family lived on when I was born. She is currently the manager of Aboriginal Catholic Ministries and has an incredible expertise about how do we make the spirituality of our First Nations people and traditional owners within the Catholic Church meaningful in a time when, and with a history where the Catholic Church has not always done the right thing by our First Nations peoples. We also have Vicky Clarke, who is the chairperson of the Open the Doors Foundation. She has had a lot to do with the Society in the past and wrote at the Prayer for Reconciliation, which is said at the beginning of the meetings where members meet. She has a great passion for educating youth and for educating First Nations youth. We've also got Kevin Sheedy, and he's done a lot of work asking difficult questions of the organisation that he works for, the AFL, about how to reach out and incorporate and listen to voices of our First Nations peoples and give people that come from Aboriginal backgrounds a chance to grow. So in choosing these three speakers this year, we were very, very lucky. There's a really good chance that the first traditional owner Prime Minister of this country is currently sitting in one of our churches, or learning in one of our Catholic schools, or learning to play football in one of our younger teams across this country. And so the expertise that Sherry, Vicky, and Kevin bring to this conversation, we're really lucky to have those three. So I'm going to hand over to them now.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight at a very special conversation about what we can do better in the space of reconciliation. My name is Vicky Clarke. I'm a descendant of the Wemba Wamba people, Mutthi Mutthi people in southwestern New South Wales and Western Victoria. And I'm currently sitting on the lands of the Wurundjeri Country people. And I'm very privileged that I actually have the Murray River in my front yard, and once upon a time the old Naya trotting track too. So I've got quite an interesting journey of and very lucky Aboriginal person, really. I used to use the word privileged all the time because I had the opportunity of growing up and walking in the footsteps of my old people. My mother was very committed to keeping me connected to country, keeping me connected to family. So I had an extraordinary childhood as an Aboriginal person, living in Melbourne, may I tell you, and schooled in Melbourne, but also having the opportunity to come back to my homelands. I started working many years ago, probably over 30 years now, at the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry. And that then took me into all sorts of experiences within the church, within the various agencies that are connected to the church, the schools as well. And the space that I was working in was really about reconciliation and breaking down those terrible stereotypes that many of our fellow Catholics, many of them had of Aboriginal people, and yet hadn't even met an Aboriginal person. So that time was quite challenging as a young Aboriginal Catholic woman, and very challenging. And I used to really think about what can we do in this space that's going to be better. So during that time, also, I must say one of the highlights, my time at the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry, was when we actually established a foundation called Open the Doors Foundation. And that foundation celebrated 20 years this year. on the 4th of August, National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Day. Now, that foundation was set up with some very clear principles. And as I say, it's a real highlight for me to be able to have been part of the establishment of the foundation. But its key focus was really based on what I would call would be the ancient wisdom in Aboriginal society. And that wisdom was nurtured around their children, teaching their children about cultural things, teaching the children about the laws, teaching the children about the whole of creation, but also teaching their children that they need to be able to compete in this new world, not like the world of our ancestors, but into this new world. So they wanted to, families were very strong in saying that they wanted that opportunity to have a choice in education and have their children equipped with the functions that we all need and to be able to get a job, to be able to, compete even on the sporting fields, but to be equal in the rest of whole Australian society. So 20 years ago, setting that foundation up with some really good friends and some great partners too. And St. Vinny's was part of that journey with us. They became our partners. It was way back in 2003, I think it was. And it was at the time when St. Vinny's was looking at, well, what's this future direction of St. Vinny's? What is our future? What is it that, they were looking for projects to that was emphasising self-management and encouragement. And during that partnership or relationship with St. Vinny's, I actually flew to Canberra to meet with the National Council. And this is the time of Sid Tutton at St. Vinny's there. And I went up there with a special request to St. Vinny's. And that request was that I wanted to pray for Aboriginal people, pray for reconciliation. So, and sadly at that time, we put that request also to the hierarchy in the Catholic Church, and that was refused back then because we wanted to pray for the Aboriginal people who were massacred in this land so that their spirits would rest. And that was refused because they were not faithfully deceased. So I went to St. Vinny's with that story, and today at every conference, you start your meetings with that very prayer that I took to Canberra. So it gives me good feelings, good heart to know that you're still using that prayer of reconciliation today. And I believe, that's the prayer that Kevin's paraphrased at the introduction tonight. So living on Wurundjeri Country, keeping myself connected to the waterways, keeping myself connected to the land, the spirit of our old people, the protection of sacred sites, and as well as the special looking after our old people that are rising from the earth and taking them back to country to be reburied. So my work today varies in many. I've got many, many hats, but as the chairperson of Opening the Doors Foundation, I give thanks to St. Vinny's for being with us on that journey, and hopefully one day we would be able to start that journey again between the St. Vinny's and Opening the Doors. Thank you.
Wow. Hello, I'm Sherry Balcombe. I'm the coordinator of the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry in Thornbury. I took over in 2015 after Vicki Clark left. I would like to acknowledge that I'm currently on the land of the Bunurong people and in the Kulin Nations in Victoria. And I've lived on this country all my life. All my family are from Far North Queensland. I'm a very proud Olkola and Djabugay woman who was born down here and raised in Victoria on the Kulin Nations. I had a very different upbringing to Vicky. I was sort of brought up by my mum, a single mum, and my dad was sort of in and out. So I had a very different experience, and with all of my family in Far North Queensland, Cairns. So, and I was really lucky when I was one of those children at school. I was the naughty kid at school that talked all the time and was in trouble, wagging. That was me, and didn't get on too well in school. And later on, after I left school, I did a couple of jobs, and then I heard about the welfare. There was a welfare course being run at Preston TAFE by the Aboriginal community, and it was the best thing that I did. It really changed my life, having access to that education. And I went on and got a diploma in social science, and then I worked at Victorian Aboriginal childcare for about 6 years in foster care, and worked in the family group homes and around community. And then I ended up got married and had a few children. And so by the time I sort of got to, I had twins. I had a girl and a boy, and then I had twins, so it was sort of pretty impossible to keep working. And when we'd recently moved homes, and we moved out to Point Cook, and I was looking for tutoring for my children, and I found out about the opening the doors, and I applied for it, and I couldn't believe that, that we got some funding to help with the kids in school. So fantastic. And so I rang up just to say thank you to the foundation, because it was the first time we'd ever been given any support. And I was offered a job, and I sort of thought, well, I can't work. I've got 2 little children. I've got 4 kids. I've got, 2 in grade 1. I can't really work. And then Vicky said, well, look, I said, what about the kids? And she said, well, she asked me if I'd like a job, and I said, well, I can't, and then she said, well, how about you start at 10 o'clock? I said, yeah, but then what about school holidays? Well, you can have school holidays off. So all these reasons not to work were taken out of my way. And as a result, it changed my life again. I ended up on another journey, and I think this is what I'm meant to be doing. I really appreciate working at the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry and being able to have a voice, and to be able to use that voice in spaces where it can hopefully make a difference for our community. And I'm very, very passionate about moving forward in our community, about education. I think I could never ever give back to our community what our community has given to me. I think that welcoming, and it doesn't matter that you don't have any family here, as long as you're one of the gang and one of the mob, then you're accepted. And so I'm very, very grateful for the support that myself and my family have received from our community. And but I really think that what I do is just part of the bigger scheme. I think today we walk in the footsteps of giants, and people like Vicki Clarke, who came before us and did all the hard yards, and they were out there protesting before when it wasn't popular. Out there and continuing to lobby governments and to protest and to do things differently. And I think that was one of the things about the Aboriginal Catholic Ministry that really drew me to that, is because it was really caring about each other. A big thing's education, about helping to educate our children. And I think it's not just about educating our children. If we can educate the wider community, we need to so that we can move forward. We can move forward to a treaty. We can have a more just society in Australia. And I think we're, at the moment, we're in a really critical time in history where we can make things happen and we can make them change. But that comes down to education, and it's about getting everybody on board. And so, I have lots of hope for the future. I think we have some really powerful, young, spirited, strong warriors that are coming up through the ranks, and they've had a different upbringing to what Vicky and myself have had. And so, you know, our youth today are global. And so they see things on a global stage, which is wonderful. It's something that they can take with them. You know, and we can help to educate our kids and we can change our situation in this country. So I'm very grateful for the things that I've been gifted. And I'm really grateful for the voice that I have. And I hope that I can continue to help to educate the wider community about Aboriginal people, and we can make a difference, because that's the dream. So thank you.
Well, unbelievable. I really enjoyed listening to you two ladies. It's obviously I'm not an Indigenous person, but I'm an Australian person. My family's from Ireland, my grandparents. And to me, it was not knowing about Indigenous people that probably set me back and thought, well, you know, who am I? And I ended up being a guy called Kevin Sheedy, a little kid that grew up in the inner suburbs of Melbourne. You don't know what's going to happen in your life at that age, obviously. We never had television, so you don't get to see too much, and you didn't get to read that much, to be honest. Your first 10 years, we never got TV till the 56 Olympics. And then along the way, you sort of found out that there, through a comic strip in the paper, that there was a person called an Aboriginal. Now, that sounded an unusual word, so much different than Smith, Harris, Brown, or, you know, Johnson, or the English language, even Wangaratta and Ballarat, all these sorts of, you wonder where your thoughts start thinking about who are these people? And, of course, along that journey between 10 years of age and TV and radio, and obviously moving in and around the country after getting to Richmond as a footballer, I had the very good fortune to have a job as a development officer going around Victoria. And that really opened my eyes for the first time. I'd spent a couple of years in the Army, and, of course, by now I'm around 20. By the time I got out of the Army, I went to do a training session for kids and to meet a legend of football in South Australia and the Tiwi Islands called David Cantilla. He's the tallest person, the blackest person I'd ever seen in my life, and I couldn't believe it was my country because I'd never seen that. And I'm just being open and honest. I had never, ever understood that growing up in Chapel Street, Prahran, South Yarra, Richmond, those sorts of areas. And this sort of recognised to me because there wasn't hardly a player playing in the AFL other than one person I played against, and the other one was a legend, that's Polly Farmer, and the other guy was Sid Jackson. So up until probably until Michael Long and Nicky Winmar, there were only 28 Indigenous players played in 130 years in Victoria at BFL level, which is just a disgrace after when you find out how many Indigenous people there were in the country. So, you know, open the gates to me was about taking the hinges off the doors of the gates and throwing them into a fire and getting rid of what this unfortunate experiences of what I was learning in my life, because I got brought up by the Presentation Nuns, a fantastic group of people in the De La Salle brothers. And they're all about giving a person in need a fair go. It's as simple as that. And it had nothing to do with what religion they were. It didn't even mention colour. It's just that anybody in need, you should really try and help. And this is the upbringing I'm having, one of 7 kids with mum and dad and a couple of bedrooms in the house. So where do you fit 9 people? In a rabbit burrow. Okay, that was my upbringing, basically. And I'm very proud of that, you know. But I'm very proud of the things I try to attempt to do and discussing and building bridges with people, all sorts of people. And as a matter of fact, probably in the end, I recruited a guy called Basher Hurley, the first Muslim boy to Essendon, just to make sure you continue along the way of helping people that need help. So, to my way of thinking, it was a great learning lesson and has been one of the better things I've done in my life. Very proud to be involved in recruiting over 20 Aboriginal boys. And, of course, Michael Long was a wonderful person. And a lot of people don't realise that you can do something. It's just about your attitude. Life's about attitude. I think every school should have in their curriculum First Native Peoples history. Only quite recently I was in Sydney at the museum and bought one of the best books, and I'm a bit of a bookaholic, to be honest, but I bought a book called, I'll get it up there, Unsettled, okay? Two young women, Indigenous women, have created a magnificent work of the history of Indigenous Australians start to where they are now. It's a beautiful presentation, and I took my daughter, who's 40, she's a nurse. Most Sheedies are nurses, which is good because that means you help and you care about people. I think it's, to me, when you put your hand up, and I grew up in a very strict Irish Catholic family with mum and dad and a whole Sheedy mob. They're all out of Irish Republic down Cork and Cove and County Clare. So pretty similar. We're tribal. We're Celts and Native and Aboriginal people. So to me, that's the mob I come from. If that helps anybody wanting to listen, because it's all about people. And I think the more we listen and understand the journeys of people and what's happened in the history of our world, which I think would be in the discussions of learning about where Indigenous people first come from, which is obviously Africa. I did go over to a fantastic museum display in Chicago with my wife approximately maybe 15 years ago, and they had the whole history of Indigenous Australians in that museum, and I think they had it there for about maybe a year to 2 years, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't leave it. And I learned more about reading about the history of my Aboriginal people, our Aboriginal people, longest living race of people in the world are in our country, and we don't necessarily respect them enough. So I think we should break that barrier down gradually. Obviously, people in a hurry will have accidents. So gradually, if we can get that right, I think we'll find a better Australia, a better caring, loving and meaning Australia. I think that's important that we find that. I mean, I know we're going through difficult times, but we've been through 2 world wars. We've been through a Vietnam War. We're going through a COVID-19. We've been through a depression, and so are the Indigenous people. Has that brought us any closer? No. And I think in the end, I think the Australian education system was pathetic in not having one curriculum that every kid, particularly in the first 6 years of their life, learning about the history of our first Australian people. And I mean that. There's a lot of things you could say when you're introducing our First Nations people. I actually look at it and I think to myself, where did it all start? And a lot of people listening, I hope you understand, because it actually started in America. Because soon as soon as the English lost the War of Independence and the Americans won it, then the British wanted to look for another colony to put their prisoners. That's how this started. So I think we need to understand the whole history instead of ignoring it. The British have done a lot of cruel things over the years, because that's what, unfortunately, colonisation around the world's done. You can ask all the countries they've done and been to. I'm not saying it's good, bad or indifferent. I'm just saying that is what happened. But our problem is to sit down and listen to Indigenous people, read your history, study it, and then do something about it.
Yeah.
And I've enjoyed being involved. The best thing I think I've done in my life for Indigenous people is that we create, not AFL, definitely not AFL. It's about creating with Simon Crean, Labor and Liberal government, the AFL Apprenticeship Traineeship Commission, and we put $1 surcharge on every finals ticket. It's only an idea with Bill Kelty, and we got it through the AFL Commission, and obviously he was on it with the late Ron Evans, and we've raised somewhere in the vicinity of 16,000 jobs for boys and girls, and 2,000 of those jobs, 2,000 are for Indigenous kids. And that's probably the most pleasing thing I've done in my life, other than get married and have 4 children. But my wife had the children, I didn't. Thank you.
I think that's a really good point. It's about the education, and I think you don't know what you don't know. And I think our education system has kept everybody so much in the dark. It's been the hidden secret, and I think that's probably because it is such a brutal past, and it is a difficult thing to face up to. But what do we do as a country? Do we continue to ignore it and leave it in the corner? Let the sore continue to fester, or do we tend to it? It might hurt at the start. It's not going to be great, but face up to it. Let's tend the wound so that it can start to heal. The longer we leave it to fester, the worse it is. A country can't move forward until they look back and acknowledge. And, we have had the apology, which was an incredible thing for Aboriginal people around Australia. Vicky and I were lucky enough to both be there at the time, and it was, what an exceptional time in history. But there needs to be action with that. There needs to be action. We've got the closing the gap. The gap's getting bigger. And it reminds me of that thing about keep putting your hand in the fire and, your hand keeps getting burnt. When are you going to realise that that's not working? And I think that's what our government needs to do. They need to start to listen to us. And it comes back to truth-telling about our history and a voice in Parliament. We're the only country in 58 countries in the Commonwealth that don't have treaties with its First People. Shame. That's a terrible... I think that's a terrible thing. And are Australians happy with that? That they're the only country in the Commonwealth? And that they live in the country with the longest continuous culture in the world. And those people don't have a voice in their own country.
And that's the challenge too, Sherry, for the population of Australia, or the main population of Australia, because we're only, 2% or something. They need to value that. And Kevin said it, one of the oldest living cultures in the world. We've got people coming up out of the ground, telling the world we've been here for at least 40,000 years. Our ancestors are rising to tell that story. And do they value that? Do they really value that? It doesn't start with the lawnmowers and the Hills Hoist and all that, and the sheep and the windmills. It goes way back before that. And the sophistication of our old people way back then to be able to survive, practice ceremony and rituals, 40,000 years ago.
I think, sorry, Vicky, but I think that the problem is that the most people are going to be listening to us are going to be people our age. And it's going to be very difficult to change people our age.
Yeah.
That's why I really believe in the end that we've got to really have a platform for the people at the present time listening to make sure that you really advance that group between at least 12 to 50 years of age.
Yeah. Kevin, I had a Zoom meeting the other day with university students. They were all going to be teachers. They wanted to know about a particular agency that I work for. I won't name that agency publicly. And I said, how many more years have you got to go at university? Oh, this is our last year. I said, and you're asking me these questions about Aboriginal people. I said, what are they teaching you about Aboriginal people at the university? I said, you need to be coming out of there as a teacher, qualified and equipped and confident to be able to teach Aboriginal perspectives across all subjects. It's not.
Yeah, you're right. But the problem in the end is getting it into the right area earlier.
Yeah.
And every school in this country should have an Indigenous map of every individual Aboriginal nation. And I've got one here at my home and I love it.
I think it needs to start earlier than that, though. I think it needs to start in kinder. My grandson had last year, they have the local council, they engage local traditional owners, and they had 10 kindergartens, and they invited the families along with the children to come along, and they had a day on country. And it was fantastic. Now, 8 little stations, walking on country, doing rock painting, doing signs. It was really beautiful. And I thought, here's a great way to start teaching kids about Aboriginal culture. And if you can show them, we can reveal little things so that they can learn the true story. But it needs to be a progression that happens, so that you get the whole story. I don't know how many schools I've gone to, and you have students come out and say, I didn't know that this happened in our country. How can we teach about World War I and World War II, but we're not teaching about the frontier wars that happened here? We're not teaching about the massacre sites. We're not teaching about the resistance. There's the whole story about, that, they saved us, which is, couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, look, I think in the end, to me, my last coaching job was in West Sydney, where 170 nations lived and worked, and the outer boundary of the Greater Western Sydney Giants is Blacktown, where the Aboriginal people were sent and named it Blacktown. That's historic. That is incredible. And, of course, so when you start to say in kinder, they're going to have a lot of kids from all around the world. They're going to have to try and learn along with, Anglo-Saxon Celt children. So that's going to be a big task for kinder, I think. But, look, every school's got its own curriculum. But I think the Catholic education system should lead the way. That's my point. And how you go about it and what group of people you get together is what St. Vinny's can do in pushing that in the correct direction. The question really at the start of our conversations have been, what would you really do? And I'd like to, really see it down probably to 1, 2, or maybe 3 at the most, because it's hard to get one up. I mean, it took that long to really put 100, then 200 and then 300 Aboriginals into the AFL. And we sat on 28 for 130 years, which is just ridiculous. So I would actually go out and source out what would be a wonderful lesson for primary school kids, a whole curriculum, which is what Catholic education departments should do, and bring in First Nation people as a subject. And when you open up your school book, there'll be 2 maps, one of Australia Today and one of Indigenous Australia before. Okay, so we get to understand the landscapes of the many nations of Aboriginal people that have been here for years, centuries. And wow, now that to me is as important as ABC. And I don't understand why we haven't done it, because we've been here for over 200 years and it's been an absolute pathetic effort by all governments who lack leadership in this area. So do something. So if you're running St. Vinny's, whoever that person is, whoever's going to roll out the red carpet, walk straight up to the Catholic Education Department and put it on the table. That's it.
Kevin, thanks for that. And I too, if I was sitting on the top chair there at St. Vinny's, I would be really calling for an audit and just have a look inside. What does St. Vinny's actually looks like for Aboriginal people? You know, is there anything in there that tells me when I walk in the door or anyone who's applying for a job, is this place a culturally safe place for me to work? St. Vincent de Paul really needs to have a really good look inside out to see why aren't Aboriginal people, you know, going for jobs in their agency. I know there's lots of volunteers at St. Vinny's and they have an incredible youth group. Are you going to start educating your own youth group? I don't think your publications tell many stories in your publications. Maybe that's going to change. I know you're working towards a reconciliation action plan. So, but that's not enough. It's not enough to have a reconciliation action plan. You've got to see change. And you won't see change until you see Aboriginal people walking in your door.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Vic. You know, how many people, audit yourselves inside, how many people work for the organisation? How many people are you actually paying wages to? How many people are you encouraging? How many people are you training? You know, look at your numbers in there. And if not, why not? If we've got so many skills, we've got educated people out there. We've got people with so much knowledge, you know, that we can make a difference. And I think that's a really big one, is how many Aboriginal people do you actually have? Do you have contacts? You know, wherever you are, you know, are you engaging local Aboriginal people? Are you welcoming them in? Are there those signs there to welcome them in? And also about educating the staff, because to have those Aboriginal workers being there, as Vicky said, they've got to feel culturally safe. So is there education about our culture? You know, and I think a big one, particularly when you're talking about St. Vincent de Paul, is looking at the spirituality. You know, our culture is built on spirituality. There's an Oxford Dictionary of world religions, and they speak of every religion other than Aboriginal spirituality, because we're the only culture in the world where you cannot separate the culture from the spirituality. Our spirituality is our culture. And if you ask any Aboriginal people, say to them, like 90% of them, you say to them, are you religious? And they say no. But you say to them, do you believe in the creator spirit? Yes. Do you believe in the dreaming? Yes. Do you believe in the ancestors? Yes. Yeah. So, and this is spirituality. It's our spirituality. And it's something that, you know, our ancestors gave to us without even knowing that they did. And I think that's our spirituality is the thing that's really kept us together. It's a thing that keeps calling our kids home. It keeps calling our people home. It's kept us strong. That so many hundreds of years, we've had to hide a lot of that. That's had to be hidden because we weren't allowed to practice ceremony, weren't allowed to speak language, we weren't allowed to practice ritual. And so it's only now that our community is starting to feel safe enough to be able to bring some of those things out and share them with the wider community. You know, so if we can start to teach people about our spirituality and they understand that, then they can get a bit of an understanding about who we are as people and how we're connected.
Growing up as a Catholic was pretty serious in our family. My father was a very, very devout Catholic. But connecting Jesus with the Indigenous people and people of other nations, I think, is very important for our listeners. And I don't think that we've ever seen that really, or I haven't personally seen it enough, in particular in the very early years of my, say, first 30 to 40 years of life. Not until you actually feel good about, confident that you can actually say, well, look, I think that was the message I received as a Catholic growing up. So I'm going to go and do my thing about what I can do for caring about other people. In this situation, okay, it's Indigenous Australians, First Nation people. So I think that the listeners today need to find that pathway with the message of Christ through our religious leaders. And if you haven't found that yet, then develop it. Develop it.
Yeah. Yeah, and Kevin, you the relationship, and I'm going from my own personal experience here with my grandparents, because my grandfather was a blind man, and it was common for my nan to read the Bible to him. Okay. And when she would read the Bible, they would have conversations then about this man, Jesus. And I can always remember as a child that they would be talking about Jesus as the liberator, the man of hope. He's going to help us to get through this. And it was through prayer, and it was through their lifestyle that they read about in the Bible is how they got through it. Out of the 11 children they had, not one of them was taken away.
Wow.
Not one. And that's because of their belief in that man, Jesus. Now, the Creator series already talked about the Creator Spirit, and we've our mob have been talking to the Creator Spirit for thousands and thousands of years. The evidence is in the rock art around Australia.
Yeah.
You know, where the laws were given to our old people. And those were like the same as Moses getting the 10 Commandments. And it's the same story, and that the evidence is in the land. But I just wanted to, if I could, Sherry, just elaborate a little bit about you and what you were saying there about St. Vinny's. And really, if the worst thing that could ever happen, okay, we're going to open our doors and employers start to really encourage, maybe have an employment traineeship program running through St. Vinny's, and all these Aboriginal kids, put their hands up for it here in the state, and they start working at St. Vinny's, and someone in the tea room says, "Oh, are you Aboriginal, are you?" Dong. Who had the right? What? No one's got the right to ask that person if they're Aboriginal. I don't go around asking people if they're Greek or Italian. And the second thing, what part of you is Aboriginal? Where's that coming from? What part of you is Aboriginal? These are the sorts of things, the language that deters Aboriginal people from walking in the doors. They'll go to op shops. Don't worry about that. They're mob love op shops. They like going to St. Vinny's op shops. They go here up here at Swan Hill. They're there every pension day in the op shop. So, but we've got to get beyond that. We're talking about opportunities for the future, and St. Vincent de Paul opening their doors, and it just can't happen just like that. There's got a whole process. All the people in that place needs to be a culturally safe place.
Yeah, I can understand that recruiting. It gets back to having a very good recruiting plan. First of all, you've got to have a think tank session, St. Vincent's, about how you will go about it with a group of people. Not every idea is going to be the right idea, but to me it's about how you recruit correctly so that it's not going to fail. And you don't do that in a rush. You do it step by step. It took a long time for the AFL to become the AFL, leaving the VFL. Took a long time. And a lot of those areas have got changed so drastically for the people that they had to be taught the flexibility about change. Because if you're going to make changes, make sure they end up successful. So I think the way you plan this is going to be a huge task. That's if St. Vinny's take it on board. And that's all about great leadership, really. And, there are a lot of great leaders around, by the way, I can assure you. I have a good look around and I'm thinking to myself, maybe, forget about it. Yeah, she's good. He's not bad, blah, blah, So, that's me looking from a distance on life. And I'm in the last quarter. Probably I'm heading towards time on. So I've got 10 years left. I'm just saying hello to everybody and giving you a little bit of a thought process about maybe the way St. Vinny should look at it. But anyway, that's me, and I don't want to push everything, but I agree. I love listening to you two ladies, in particular because I'm not Indigenous, and that's crucial for me because I need to know about how you people feel, because people are listening about my type of people. They need to have a decent look and study at this stage of their life, like I am. I mean, I'm 74 coming up, and I want to keep developing, still to be a terrific leader in my latter years of my life. And I feel important about that, because that's what I was taught by the nuns and the brothers in the first place. You didn't earn your life. It was given to you. It was a gift from your parents. Now go and do something about it. And that's what we all should be teaching our kids.
Our first question: what is the most important place for the St Vincent de Paul Society to start? And this question is addressed to Vicky.
I think the best place for St Vincent de Paul Society really needs to start with where they've come from. Why not create what you did, and looking at the future directions of the society in a modern world? Have you gone backwards, or have you continued to move forward in the modern world with your rules that you have, but bring them alive and be a little bit flexible too with it? I'm not asking you to break the rules of St Vincent de Paul Society, but to keep it into that modern world and that modern thinking. You really need to start. You really, really need to start by looking at St Vincent de Paul, and is it a safe place for Aboriginal people to be in? I can't get past that. It has to be a safe place, even with your delivery of your various services. And I've heard of this before. People have turned up to visit Aboriginal families, and then they're questioned about their identity. St Vincent needs to start to understand, and Kevin hit it in the nail on the head earlier. It's about self-education. His journey that he's been on by self-educating himself. He grew up in Paran and all those places, didn't even know blackfellas existed. Then he come to the realisation, there's Aboriginal people in this land, and he started on his own journey. So that's where each and every one of the St Vincent de Paul Society members need to start. And if not individually, but as a conference, do it together, strengthen each other. Talk about the things that you're learning. There's an incredible story to be told right across Victoria. We have 38 Aboriginal tribes here. And we have many, many sacred sites here. We have Aboriginal organisations that are built around educating people about their country, whether it's Boonwurrung country, Wurundjeri country, Djabugay country, Wemba Wamba country. It's not hard, and it can be done. But it needs to be made a priority. That's where you got to start. You got to make this a priority, or where you really want to get to.
Our second question, also addressed to Vicky: how do we support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in the workplace?
You know how hard it is for Aboriginal people who are not in that stereotypical image of being an Aborigine. It's so hard for them. They've grown up, they've come from kindergarten, they've been to school, they've been to secondary school, now they're going into a workplace, if they're lucky, and then they get questioned about their Aboriginality because they're not black enough. And that's got to stop. You've really got to understand. So cultural safety training is critical and should be on the high list of St Vincent de Paul Society. Start there in Box Hill, then move it across into your regions, especially into your regions too. And you know that there's a culture, a culture out there that and it's very cliquey, very, very cliquey in some of these conferences that we have around the state. And it's like people actually own these conferences. So you've got to be very careful when you with Aboriginal people about challenging their identity, especially, if we're engaging them in the workplace. And please don't expect every Aboriginal person to be a walking, talking encyclopedia. Can anyone tell me about how many public housing do you have in Victoria? Your everyday Joe Blow on the street. But can you tell me the health statistics? Can you tell me this? Can you tell me? We're not walking and talking in encyclopedias. We are the living. We're living in the moment. We're living here now. And what we can give is what we can give. Don't try and judge us because we don't know and because we're not black enough, because that's just not on. And it does happen. And I've known it to happen in some of the places within St. Vincent de Paul's conferences around the state.
Our third question: which aspects of culture should be stressed in educating our members, volunteers and staff? This is addressed to Sherry.
I've got to agree with you, Vicky, in a lot of that stuff, and I'm one of those ones that really come up against that. How much are you? I stood in a restaurant one time and I stood up and I said, oh, well, it's just, what am I, a quarter caste? Am I just this part down here? And we get questioned all the time about our lineage and how much have you got in you, and I think most people don't know, we go from black to white in 4 generations. My great-grandmother is black, and when people see that and they see that visual of my great-grandmother, then I don't get questioned. But why should I have to be questioned? And why should I have to justify how much Aboriginal I've got in them? As we said, you wouldn't say to an Italian, how much Italian have you got in you? They're just Italian. But for Aboriginal people, we have to justify all the time. How much Aboriginal have you got in you?
I love it.
Or a great one, I had a principal tell me that I wasn't really an Aboriginal. So I thought, what, because I'm living in a house and I've got a job and I've got a car, why aren't I Aboriginal? My family in Cairns, they're all got jobs and they've all got cars and they've all got houses. They ain't living in Myers and Humpies. We haven't been doing that for a long time. But because of the colour of our skin, we get put into this box that you're not really. You don't know me. You don't know who I am and what my connections are. My children, I've had the racism that they've come up against in their workplaces, in their schools and in their workplaces has been terrible. And, I had my daughter come home and my son, and I say to him, but you have to stand up and challenge that language, because if you don't challenge that language, then they think that it's okay to do that. They think that it's okay to judge us like that and to say derogatory things about Aboriginal people. So we have to be strong and stand up and challenge that language. But we get tired. We get tired doing that. And also, I want to pull back to as far, about having Aboriginal people in organisations. They have to feel safe. And that's why that they aren't in there, is because they're not feeling safe. So I think that, we have got a lot of work to do. And I think one of the big aspects of the Aboriginal culture that would help to change people's attitudes, I think, if they looked at our spirituality and see how deep and meaningful and true our spirituality is, that ours isn't learnt from a book, that ours is gifted to us from in the womb. It's something that's given, it's part of us when we're born. And even if we don't understand it, it's still there. And that's what keeps us strong. And I think the other thing that I too wanted to talk about was how Aboriginal people, we end up, and I know me even within the Catholic, dial the black. I'll be, we want one black mum on that seat. So, we want you on every committee and we want you on every every panel, and we want you, because you can talk. There's a lot of other people out there that can do stuff too. And unless they're given the opportunities, because I have learned how I talk, and I've learned a lot of it. I've learned it off Vicky. From being working with a strong Aboriginal woman who's confident in herself, and she taught me. I wouldn't be where I am today without Vicky's mentoring. But how many other people are lucky enough to have a mentor like that? And we need to be able to start to create those opportunities. And by having Aboriginal people working there, and then having even younger ones coming in, then they have that opportunity for mentorship within the organisations. So I think that's got a lot to do with changing the situation for Aboriginal people.
This question is to all of our panel. Is it essential to start by openly tackling underlying racism in order to be able to do better in the areas suggested?
As a child, I was, people would say I was Greek. You're Greek or Italian because that was acceptable.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
acceptable to be. I remember my dad telling stories about being a little kid. He was born in Yarrabah and left on his own from the age of 5, but being out the back of shops, and he'd tell people he was Italian, and then they'd throw him some food. If he said he was Aboriginal, they wouldn't even throw him the scraps. So, and I think it's that in-ground racism that is here that people don't even realise that it's out there, because it's so, what's a word for it? It's just so undercover. And, how many times I've been to parties and you have people sit there and say, I'm going to tell you a joke. Well, make sure it's not going to offend me. And then there's, I won't tell it then. Good, don't. But why do people think that it's acceptable to make jokes and to say derogatory things to Aboriginal people? And we need to get over it. We would never ever tell people, you would never ever tell the Jews to get over the Holocaust. You wouldn't tell Australians to get over the Anzacs and forget about it. But Aboriginal people are expected to forget about what's happened to us and to move on and to tough it out.
We can't keep thinking too that Aboriginal people are the poor people.
Sure.
Right.
We can't keep thinking that. If St. Vinny's want to do anything, they need to walk in liberation with Aboriginal people.
Change the language.
That's. Don't keep thinking of us as being the poor black fellas that need your help.
The marginalised.
You've got to move that mindset that we are here to walk in solidarity for the liberation of the First Peoples in this country.
Wow. In the opening words, I said that our speakers would challenge us, and they did just that. A measure of success of challenging ideas is found in whether they make us feel uncomfortable. I'm sure that you, like me, did not find some of the things easy to accept, but we must do exactly that if we are to move forward and do better. We need to weigh out what will work and what will be possible. One of my heroes is Martin Luther King Jr. He dared us to dream, and that is still relevant today. I heard some very clear directions coming from all three of our speakers. Firstly, we must address underlying racism in all its forms, both overt and subtle. Our society needs to be a safe place for First Nations people where they are not put down at all. We must place importance on education of our members, our staff, of Aboriginal children and young adults. This message was resounding. It's a great place for all of us to begin, starting with learning more about the history of our own country, all of it, warts and all. We must show respect and work together. These things are not easy to change overnight, but we must start, and now. I thank our three speakers sincerely for their openness in leading us in a difficult topic, for their time in the lead up, for their flexibility in the format, and for their generosity in contributing enormously to giving us a lead in doing better in our treatment of our First Nations people. Thank you all for joining us in this year's Ozanam Conversation, and I hope you have enjoyed the challenges we have put to you. Thank you.